we closed the deal, we made our number. Everybody was understanding of the decision, back to principled negotiations. We had to negotiate I had 2 internal sales before we could close the deal. I don't think everybody was super happy with what happened, but they understand the situation and they're willing to take the terms of what was needed. And we moved forward and everybody was fine, right? So that's a great example of an internal sale, and how you bring facts and data and get emotions out of it to get to where you need to be to move forward.
We round out our series on negotiations with a chat with Hope McIntosh-Trigg, CEO of MCG, a business consulting firm focusing on technology and digital sales and strategy. Hope has a ton of negotiation experience. She has amassed a 20-year career in the technology sector in tech operations, consulting, sales, marketing, and business strategy with tech giants such as Honeywell, Compaq, HP, VMware, Dell, and AirWatch, having positions and consulting projects with clients in the commercial and public sector space that have taken her across the globe and within the 50 states. She's been a CRO, a COO, and a CEO, and she's with us here today. Hello, folks, and welcome to Startup Different. I'm Dave, he's Chris, and it's not just us this week. We have another guest, Hope McIntosh-Trigg. Hope, welcome to the program. How are you today?
Hi, Chris. How are you guys doing?
Oh, fantastic. How's New Mexico? How's the garden? How's life out there?
The garden's good. I actually just planted all my vegetables last weekend and it was a gorgeous day. So got tomatoes, cucumbers, all the yummies, lots of herbs, and then my orchard trees are looking great too. So I think I should get some apricots and lots of dried fruit and pies. I'm sure by then my family's going to hate all of it. They're going to be like, stop giving us all this organic, lovely food and vegetables. Like, where's
Stop.
It is. We want to go get some enchiladas, Mom, right? Like, let's not do this.
Yeah. I don't want to be so healthy. Gosh, yeah, I hear you. Well, that's fun. That's awesome. I'm glad how are the woofers too? Are they going to make an appearance today? That'd be exciting. I don't know.
No, not going to make an appearance today.
No, yeah. You have to negotiate with dogs sometimes. We can't go outside right now. We were just outside for 25 minutes. Can't do it again. Anyway, whatever. I digress.
That's
but
true.
Hey, I hope it's.
I know we need to stay quiet here. So yeah, they're definitely keeping my life very busy. But the 2 dogs are definitely not anywhere close to me at the moment.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And so this is the final episode of our first series of season 3, which was focused on negotiations and basically how to sort of elevate your negotiations game, as it pertains to whether that's, external sales or internal conversations or what have you. And we covered a bunch of different topics through our different episodes. And we really wanted to bring in an expert because, it's one thing for Chris and I to talk about our experiences and how that's been, but we thought, we needed a little bit more, oomph here. And I, naturally thinking about your career and all the different steps you've taken, I was like, Hope would be a perfect candidate for this. So we're thrilled to have you here today. And I guess what I want to do right off the bat, when we talk about negotiations, one of the big things that we talked about in our first episode was about how you should look inward as you prepare for a negotiation. So that is, evaluate yourself and what actually is interesting to you. And this was all part of like William Ury, who's kind of like the negotiations goat. He wrote Getting to Yes and some other really, really popular books out there on the subject. So let's say, you've got a big one, you got $1 million on the line, which I don't know, may or may not be that of a big one for you. But if you got $1 million on the line, how do you prepare yourself for the negotiation?
Well, so first off, thank you. I'm honored that you would think that I'm an expert in negotiations. And I would say that I've had my fair share. Every single one of them is very unique. And some of them I've done very well and some of them I've flubbed totally, right? Like that's just the way negotiations work. But over time, I realized that there was some really key critical things that I needed to do in preparation for negotiations. And one of them is really kind of establishing, understanding who's going to be at the table, what are their professional goals, and then what are possibly personal goals, and then what is the overall business goal. And I would normally just sit and, I think the Fisher term is having a principle based negotiation versus positioned, right? And for me,
Mm,
it's more of, and so it's really the same of like capturing as much data as you possibly can to understand. So in the process of like $1 million deal is understanding, okay, what is this $1 million deal mean to the business, to the person that I'm negotiating? What value am I going to bring to the software that we're bringing, and really start kind of articulating. I'd almost write it out like in a piece of paper, and I would say, okay, let's say I'm talking to the IT director
mhm,
and he needs to install software that is going to but his job is to look at the price, and he's also looking at IT security. The end user is a curriculum director, right? And that's his customer, right? But he's the one who's responsible for doing the negotiation. I sit down and I think about what is he or she, IT director's goals, personal, professional, business. What is the curricular director's goals, business, professional, business? And then me representing the company, how do I understand and take what we need to do, which is get the maximum profit in dollar for the product that we're offering with the best terms that would be favorable to us, that are clean, and all the things that we need to do, and just start mapping it out. And I would go through and I would establish all those things. And I think a lot of times where I would fail in negotiations is if I didn't take the time to understand any one of those three elements, right? Like maybe the IT director
mhm.
doesn't want this deal because he knows that his team is getting smaller, and he doesn't understand, and this is going to be a big, heavy lift to implement this product. And I didn't understand that. And I didn't talk through like, well, what are the challenges of your team for, implementing this? Oh, we can help you with customer success on that. But if I didn't take the time to understand those little nuances, that's a personal situation, right? It's not about if IT sec is going to grow or not go. It's that, right? And it had nothing to do with the dollar, right? I can give you a discount, but I'm not solving his problem, which is he doesn't have the team to support it. And so when
Right.
I would mess up is when I didn't really take the time to understand that.
That's it. You know what I find interesting about that is that like principled piece to it. You mentioned it really early, like having like I think you said something about being like a principled negotiator. And I think that's a lot of like really what you're trying to get at too, right? Is like how do you so there's part of it is definitely understanding the externality, like the other side and their actual needs and making sure you actually meet them in the negotiation. But I think going into it, there's definitely
Hmm.
I would suggest a pretty strong myth around how you kind of need to like beat up the other side or get the most out of them or harness the most out of them. But if you're actually a principled negotiator, does that make
Hmm.
sense? Like that to me, if you were principled, you would be looking for a much more amicable sort of outcome for all sides.
Yeah, I think so. The answer is 100% yes. Those are really only the deals that I have been able to negotiate well, is when um, we come in with facts and data, and we let the facts and the data dictate the concessions and the agreements. And the minute things turn emotional, then you get into positioning, right? I'm going to defend my position, and if I don't understand the facts and the data that are supporting the position that that person has, I need to slow down. I need to slow down the negotiations and take
Mm,
the time and say, well, let's not go into, you know, don't get offensive. And you can tell you have all the reads, all the tells of somebody getting a defensive when they're negotiating, and just start asking questions again. Slow down instead of pushing it. Hey, tell me why this is an issue for you, right? Like explain to me the situation, and go back and always go back to the data, the facts, the source, and remove the emotions. Because the minute you get emotions tied into negotiations, things just fall down, right? Like it's
right.
hard to it's hard to make people feel better, right? They have to make themselves feel better based off of, the decisions that are being made. That's so much easier when you do use facts and data to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It makes me think of another William Ury thing, which was, you don't push, you attract in a negotiation. Like it's one of
Yeah,
those things where
definitely.
if you go out there to to push your point harder, you're actually most likely going to fail. What you're actually looking to do is try to bring the
Mhm.
sides together and try to kind of find that
Right.
deal, find the things that matter between all the parties. Do you have like an example of
That
I don't know if you can talk
I
about it
do.
necessarily.
I have
Okay.
I do. I have one, and of course, I'm going to leave it all anonymous, right? But it's a really good example. I mean, I think a lot of the people that we're talking to are in sales or in business, right? And this actually had to happen with somebody who was trying to understand. It was a sales executive who was trying to understand their comp plan, right? And those of us who were in sales
Mm,
and they're looking at they get paid on commissions, and normally what happens is every year you understand that you got to have X amount of revenue brought in. Once you do that, these are the clips in which the money that you get paid out. It's a really important negotiation tactic, and most of the time you're just you get it, you read it, you understand it, and then you move on. Well, I was actually consulting with an executive at the time, and they didn't understand their comp plan, and they kept
mm,
asking for decisions and kind of kept going back to the leadership to say, can you explain it to me, can you explain it to me? And those people got really kind of obstinate, right? Like, hey, you need to sign this comp plan or you're not going to get paid in the next quarter. And so my advice to her was, and I really say this to everybody, who likes to get pushed into negotiation, right? Like pressure sales people on
yeah.
cars or the air conditioner or the solar unit on your roof, right? The minute you feel pressure and the minute that you don't understand, your default answer should always be no, right? Like that's just the way that it should be. It should be
Hmm.
no. And then if you take a step back and say, but explain it to me, right? Like, and slow down the negotiation. You're pushing me, right? That's a push. And the push is everybody does it. It's like kinetic, right? Somebody pushes you, shoulder, you're going to push back, right? And it's not
Yeah.
instead of getting pulled towards something, right? It's physics in a lot of ways, right? We're just talking about emotions and what have you. And so anyway, I mentioned it to her. I said, just tell them no, that you're not going to do it until you understand the comp plan and that you're willing and ready to do it, but just take the time to explain it to me. And at the time, she's like, I've never felt like I could say no. I just felt like I needed to get to the deadline, get to the deadline. That's why sometimes when people do deals and they say, hey, if I'm going to give you a discount on this deal if you close by the end of the month, right? Like we all do
Right.
it. Everybody's had to do it in sales, right? We've all had to do that. Those are very unnatural conversations. So when I would go into that, that's a push sale. I would always push the sale, but I would give an optionality. Like, we really would like to get this in. Is there something that we can do regarding the terms, the contract, the discounting, anything that would
Mm,
entice you to close earlier? That's a very different way of pulling them into the conversation versus saying, I got it. My boss wants me to close this deal. If I give you 5% off, will you take it? It may not be a price issue. It might be a terms issue. And you just pushed to something that he or she doesn't care about. So that push
hope
pal is very important.
Hope, your story could have been about me. Except I'm not a sales rep, I'm a nerd. But I'm honestly the guy that in the negotiation that gets pushed around, and then at some point just sort of gives in and says, "Oh, fine, I'll take whatever,"
Yeah.
and moves on. And so actually, at our very first episode in this series, I joked that I was born to give away the farm in negotiations. So what worked out well for us was that I didn't have to do the negotiations anymore when Dave joined. And basically anything that got into a negotiation, I would sort of offload it to Dave. Did you ever have a situation where there were people where you just said, look, let me handle the negotiations. You just do your thing. Was that ever something that came across your
Oh yeah,
experience?
that would happen quite a bit where somebody would just they couldn't get the deal across the table. There was an issue, and it usually kind of came back to what we just started talking about is people didn't take the time to understand who was at the table and who maybe wasn't at the table but was a customer or a key stakeholder of the person who was at the table. And so in all those cases when I would come in, it was usually the last week of a quarter. They really wanted the deal across the board. And timing was of essence because a lot of these people want to make sure they get these numbers in on a monthly and quarterly basis. And so it would happen quite a bit. And but the fundamentals were still the same, right? Is establishing a relationship, establishing the credibility, and then establishing, hey, I want to have a mutually beneficial contract, right? I don't, and I use this term pretty frequently. I don't want to get in your pocket, but I don't want you to get in mine either. So let's
Mm.
have an open dialogue on what's outstanding here. And sometimes, it was the rep who just didn't take the time to understand, oh, this isn't a discount issue, this is a terms issue, or this person doesn't have the time right now to install the product. And so can we get creative on things aside from the SKU and the discounting price, right? Like you got to get more gray. And so that would happen quite a bit. Um,
It,
and
I
it was
always,
always, sometimes we would get it done in the time, sometimes we wouldn't.
yeah, I think of it a lot
Mhm.
as kind of these that like modern sales in a lot of circumstances, maybe notwithstanding like car sales and some other kind of like more kind of like haggling situations, but like a true negotiation where you have multiple variables at play. What you're actually doing as a salesperson is you're taking the time to like listen, empathize, and understand and build a solution with your
Yeah,
product, whatever it is. You're
right,
taking the different pieces, the different concerns, the timing, the price, and all these things and kind of putting it all together as a package. And then when you put that in front of the customer, you're going to find out how close to the bullseye you got. And ideally, you were pretty close because you were listening to them. You took the time to understand their
right,
concerns. And I really found that, especially with younger reps, this is a tough thing to manage on top of the pressure of like the quarterly deliverables. They're just thinking,
right.
oh my God, I need to hit my number, because that's their job. And they do. And I empathize with them on that as well. But the reality is that,
Right.
it actually puts you further behind if you're starting to put out there deals that are just not going to happen, or you didn't take the time to really get
Hmm.
the problem. It's going to be tough for them as well. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's one of those situations where to me, the very binary difference between haggling negotiations and this like principled negotiation where you're based on facts and data is when you're haggling, you are making an assumption that both parties agree on the value of whatever you're negotiating. And
That's
that's a big
interesting.
assumption,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that's a huge assumption. And so that's why haggling traditionally doesn't work. People come out feeling like they've lost and or gained, is because that assumption of they agree on the value is or the value of the process and then what they should haggle around it. That those assumptions just really don't work. And I've never really been successful in a haggling negotiation because of that one premise.
Do you do you out of curiosity, like, I don't know, a lot of, have you been to Europe and there's like, those guys that like sell crap on the side of the street, the little souvenirs, little Eiffel Tower if you're in Paris or something like that. Have you ever like
Yeah,
haggled with those guys and tried to buy? I
totally.
find it very frustrating. I don't know if it's just like a cultural issue and that I'm not comfortable with haggling, or what, but I just like, have you ever
Yeah,
had that before? How does that go for you?
totally. And I'm terrible at it because I don't find, I think it's because there's not a, when you're haggling, like when you're on the street and you're buying tchotchkes or, I like to buy pottery when I go to Mexico, what have you.
Cool.
For me, part of it's just like, you know, their value on this is very different than my value on it. And so, I normally would play a little bit along, but I'm not in to win on those situations because it goes back to the point, right? Like this person selling this piece of pottery is probably, putting food on their tables. For me, it's a tchotchke that I'm going to take home. Right. So the value basis is extraordinarily different when you
Hmm.
think about it from that perspective. And so for me, there's some things that are better off not winning and you know when to walk away. And that's one of them.
That's a really interesting take. I love that take because I think most of the time when you consider those binary bargaining situations where you're more or less arguing with the other person over the perceived value of it. But if you have that's like a really deep emotional point. I think if you can have the wherewithal to be like, why are they doing this? They're doing it to put food on the table. Why am I doing this? I want a little, knickknack or something I can appreciate or remember the trip or whatever. And that is so different in terms of a value proposition. I think that's a really interesting take.
It's so different. It's so different. And, and I think that kind of going back to your point on, sales reps, they get desperate, right? And lots of people get desperate when they have to make something happen that way. is, you start leaning on your emotions. You lean on, I've got to get this deal because I, want to buy, my girlfriend wants me to put the pool in her backyard, and this is, it's summer. I got to get this commission check in, right? So I want to get this done. I've seen it all, to be honest with you. You fix that problem as a sales rep by having more deals in the pipeline and spending more time up front, building that who's going to add, who's personal. It's all the same: business value, personal, professional, right? Got to get all those three things down and then get to the no's fast, right? If you know this person is like, just, it's not going to happen in the quarter that you need it because it's the IT guy who doesn't have the team to sell it. Don't push them unless you think you can get to a negotiation of like, you can talk to Chris and say, hey, Chris, can we take our engineers and help implement this thing? That's kind of the internal sale, which is a big part of what's people need to talk about is what's your side of it. And so have
Dave
more.
doesn't even need to ask me. I just always say yes to anything like that. So
Work on this. If you don't understand what you're doing, we need to slow down and default no, Chris. That's going to be my.
yeah, that is my problem. There's no default no.
That was me. I was the default no. I was the screen for stuff coming at Chris. I was like, no, we can't do everything.
No,
Anyway, yeah.
that's good. You had the default. You were the default no. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, you're also making an interesting point that I do want to hit on too, which is this internal versus external negotiation sort of framework. So can you take me a little bit through, the complexities of the internal sale and what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. I think best said in like an example, right? Which I think you could recall because it was an app armor deal that we were doing when I was at Rave.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was so the complexities around when you get to a certain level, back to you being a sales rep or anybody who's negotiation, it's not just you or at the table. You have to think about all the people of the business that you're supporting. And there was a situation where we were trying to sell App Armor in this one deal. It was a huge deal. It was going to make our quarter, but it was to a federal agency. And the federal agency it was going to be a new logo for us. It was going to be the first time that we got into the federal government, which was huge, right? Like to have this level of support. Anybody who's done business with federal agencies, they have lots of terms and conditions, particularly around their contracts. And so we were kind of barreling down to the last final days of the negotiation. The rep at the time was doing a phenomenal job matching everything. We got the contract terms back, and they wanted some special contract terms, which was like a 5-year period, but they wanted to have a cancellation for convenience after year one. And that's a big deal, right? So, and it was a big deal because for a couple of reasons. For the rep, it was going to impact their commissions because it was when you put a cancellation for convenience, it means it's not really a 5-year contract. They just want to have the discounted terms for 5 years.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of a jokes move when you think about it. It's kind of ridiculous.
Jokes move, right? But yeah, yeah. So, but the other issue was the time our financial officer who was responsible for the contracts was like, I'm not going to sign this. And I was like, I think we should, right? And so again, he went into a position statement. I'm not going to do it. It was I'm not going to do this. And so I kind of pulled back. And this is the internal sale, right? I'm literally talking to the CFO going, you're serious, right? This money is going to get us to our number. We need to get this deal in. It's a new logo. It's in a new industry. Like this is a big deal. Why are you saying no? And so we started talking about it. And it turns out he took very seriously his goal to have very clean contracts, meaning no cancellation for conveniences. And we were at the time getting ready to kind of position ourselves for an exit and what have you. And this was his mantra, like, I have to have clean contracts. And so I thought, oh, well, that makes a ton of sense, right? But if we went back and if we were able to position this, right, and started talking about back to facts and data, okay, it's got this cancellation for convenience, but if you look at all federal governments, they're all that way. So why don't you go back to the people that you need to talk to? And I knew who it was. It was the CEO and some folks on our board who were really looking at this element, and find out from them if that's a big issue, because that's really seen very frequently in federal government. And so we had of course, I'm setting up meetings. This is all internal sale, right? I had to sell it to the CEO, the CFO, and the board to take this new contract term when in their whole premise, they're like, we're going to be able to sell this company with great clean contracts. And
Hmm.
so we had this conversation, and it was another sale. I needed to get them to yes. I didn't push them. I said, you don't have to do it. It was like, let's come together. Let's figure out what the pros and cons are. Well, in the end, we decided to do it. The next internal sale was to talk to the rep. Hey, rep, what are we going to do here? You thought you were going to get a multi-year term, which was great for compensation. You're not. Let's have a conversation around that. So that was an internal sale on getting them to understand the situation. We got that done. We were able to go back to the federal government, we closed the deal, we made our number. Everybody was understanding of the decision, back to principled negotiations. We had to negotiate with I had 2 internal sales before we could close the deal. I don't think everybody was super happy with what happened, but they understand the situation and they're willing to take the terms of what was
Yeah.
needed. And we moved forward and everybody was fine. Right. So that's a great example of an internal sale, and how you bring facts and data and get emotions out of it to where you need to be to move forward.
Yeah, and
And
I
go
think about
App
it too.
Armor. That was a great.
Yeah, I believe I referred to that as I remember what had happened. I believe I referred to that as a Christmas miracle when that happened. So, kudos to you on that one. But it is funny
Yeah,
too.
it was good.
I think about but you're still tying back to, again, like these principles and like, how are you going to negotiate with them? You took you went deeper, you understood them, and then you provided them with options, you worked it out. And yeah, maybe not everybody was happy, but it got to the solution where everybody was like happy enough. You built a solution, even though it was an
Hmm.
internal facing sale. You still had the same approach to it. So I think that's pretty fascinating too.
Right.
And I guess we only have a couple of minutes here, so I want to get to this one last point. I think it's really important, and it's a very direct question for you. But
Okay.
what advice would you have for founders who are just getting their feet wet to do negotiations differently? Like, what's like the one thing, or maybe you got a couple things, but what is like the one thing that you'd really want them to know if they're just starting off their career, or what have you? What's something that you want them to leave with today?
That you should value your product and or solution, and to not give away the farm, Chris.
Don't
Busted.
have Chris involved in any negotiations or your new startup.
No, but I'll elaborate, Chris. I'm sorry, that was unfair, because
Oh, I'm owning my severe lack of negotiation skills, so that's all right. I'm learning a lot this series.
I think from a founder's perspective, I think there's a couple of things that I would say is, back to principles, and I keep going back there. But if you're a founder and you're starting to build out new deals and you have these customers, a couple of things. Sometimes it's okay to say no to customers that just would not be good customers, right? Who are
Yeah.
going to take you off your product path, who are going to just not be profitable. And so when you're really clear to yourself, back about internal preparation, when you're really clear as to who are the types of clients that you want to build, what type of service do you want to offer to them? Because this is really a relationship. This is a long-standing relationship that you're going to need to do it. So be super clear about the value that you bring, that your products and your services bring. And it's okay to say no, right? Like, it's okay to not take customers. And
Yeah.
I've done that before, especially when I was starting my own consulting firm, and I was, focusing on just delighting my customers with every interaction and trying to figure out how I was going to take on new clients at the time. There was a couple that I realized when I was talking with them that I knew that I wouldn't be able to help them or service them the way that they needed for me to feel like I would do a good job. And so I just walked away from the business. And so I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, founders, traditionally have emotion around, it's their babies, right? It's your life's work, right? You're putting this out there and you want people to accept it. And so being really careful about, not letting emotions get in the way in your negotiations, and being very specific about the facts and the data of what you and your company can offer. And if it matches to the needs of the customer, then it should be a good deal. But the minute you let emotions get in the way, like, we really, really, really need this because I really, really need, the investment to go do something else, but I have all these yellow
Mhm.
flags, like, slow down, right? Like, back to the push. If I feel like I'm getting pushed to do this, the default answer should be no. Slow down, get more information, and then be very specific and feel very resolute about the value that you can bring.
Great
Awesome.
advice.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Hope. Folks, that concludes our episode today. Thank you very much, Hope, for joining us. It was a pleasure as always, and super insightful and super helpful. And folks, if you haven't already, please rate the pod, find us on social. And thanks so much again to our host, Hope. We will see you folks next week. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, subscribe to and rate Startup Different in your favorite podcast app. If you want to see our radio faces, check us out on YouTube at Startup Different and look us up on social. We're probably there if you are. And lastly, do you want to feature your startup on the show? Reach out via our website, startupdifferent.com. See you next time.